Okay, good afternoon. I'm Joe Reingold. It is Monday, February 24th, and I'm interviewing Marcie, Abadi Rhoads. And hi, Marcie.
Hi.
Hello. Tell us a little bit about your family that you know of, your recollection of your grandparents and your parents, where they lived and where they grew up.
So my grandparents, pretty much all of them came from Aleppo, Syria, or Halab is what we called it. They migrated out of Syria and into different areas. My mother's side of the family, half of them went from Syria to Mexico, and then they basically migrated to Mexico City. And then her father's family and my father's family all went to Panama. So they basically, the way we all ended up in Panama is my grandparents, my mother's parents met when my grandfather was traveling. He was a salesman. He owned his own business. And he was basically a merchant, like export-import. He started in Syria, and while he traveled, all the Syrians basically go where all the Syrians are. So he went to Mexico City, met my grandmother, fell in love with her. 3 weeks later, he gave my great-grandfather a few camels. No, I'm just kidding. And then married her. Just basically said, I want to marry your daughter. And in 3 weeks, they got married. And then they lived happily ever after until they both passed away. 60-odd years later. But so then he took her with him from Mexico and went to Panama, where it was a brand new country. It was in the 1930s 1920s, 1930s, when they immigrated to Panama. And my father was actually born there. His parents went from Syria to Israel, Palestine, to Panama. So all my grandparents basically settled in Panama eventually. And then that's where my father was born. And my father was born in Panama. My mother was actually born in Brooklyn, where my grandfather was staying for a little while doing business, because that's another hub where the Syrians live. The Syrians lived in Brooklyn, in Mexico City, and in Panama City. So it's almost like those were the three areas where they went. And a long story short, when my mom was 8, they moved back to Panama. So she was born in Brooklyn and moved to Panama when she was little. When she got older, she met my father, and then got married, and then I was born there. So anyway, I know we're jumping ahead. My grandparents were basically from Syria, and they went to Panama.
So you're saying there was a large community there of people they either already knew or got to know with similar backgrounds.
Right. So in Panama, it was interesting because, like I said, the Syrians were very close-knit. So we don't marry out. They marry Syrians. They marry Syrians from the same city. Mm-hmm. So you weren't allowed to marry a Syrian from Damascus. That was a bad thing. We only married Syrians from Aleppo. Mm-hmm. So Aleppo Jews married Aleppo Jews, and then they all kind of found where everybody lived. Anyway, so we pretty much Panama has a very large Syrian community. Mm-hmm. I think it's opposite of the United States. Most of the people in Panama are not Ashkenazi. Most of them are from Syria. Mm-hmm. Now there's more of a migration from other places, but for the most part, it's a very strong Syrian community. And I'm pretty much a pedigree, like all the parts of my family are from Syria. So yeah.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about your life growing up in Panama.
So I was, the community is very close-knit, and we only associate with Jews, really. All the Jewish kids went to Jewish day school. And there was only, when I was growing up, there was only one Jewish day school. So all the kids went there. You really didn't, it's not because we didn't want to go to other places. Nobody really went to public school unless you didn't have any money. And it's not like the United States. They have really bad public school education. So even non-Jews went to my school. So it was a Jewish private school. But I remember back then when I was growing up in Panama, there was a military dictatorship. And I actually had people in my class that were in the government and the military, like in the and it was interesting. So when we didn't associate with non-Jews so much. It's very segregated. All the Jews and the non-Jews are segregated. They don't really intermingle. And so, so I remember one time when I wanted to have my mom wanted to throw me a birthday party. My grandmother had a gorgeous, house with a big backyard, and my birthday's kind of near Halloween, and because she's American, and she had the Halloween thing, and she wanted to make me a Halloween costume party. So she wanted to invite my whole class, and my grandmother was very uncomfortable with the whole idea that there's going to be military people and non-Jews in her house, because it's anti-Semitism wasn't really felt because we were on our own, but it was like, they came from countries that didn't like Jews so much. Syria and Mexico didn't like Jews so much either. In Panama, we stayed to ourselves because we were afraid. And it's not so much that we were afraid, but we just kind of felt like maybe it would be better. So I didn't know that. So I was friends with all my friends, the non-Jews and the Jews. We didn't have so many non-Jews, maybe 4 or 5. But it was a big deal, like, having them have this birthday party. My grandmother had to agree that all the kids were allowed to come, even with the bodyguards, because they were like, I know it was funny, as the generals, and like Noriega's daughter was in my class. Wow. So it's very interesting. So,
what kind of activities were you involved in school?
So when I was little, really, I was involved in, there were school plays and things like that we would. But once every year during the Independence Day, there's a big parade that they have, and I wasn't really involved with this, but we tried to be. So we all wanted to be part of the parade, and so you either were going to be one of those baton twirlers, or a little the drummer, whatever. And so I wasn't good at any of that. So I tried to be a baton twirler, and so I to get in the parade. But we would do things like that. Like, we were very patriotic, Panamanian, but we were very involved with school things, for Jewish things and holidays. Once I got older, there's this very I got involved with this thing called Maccabi. We come from a very Zionistic background. Yes. So but Maccabi is very much like B'nai Akiba here, but there's no B'nai Akiba in Dallas. But B'nai Akiba is very similar to Maccabi. So we would go every Saturday afternoon and we'd hang out with the kids, and we would be in groups, based on age, and we would have madrichim that would make activities and shiurim, and it was very much geared towards loving Israel. And I remember also one of the things we did. It was I grew up in the 70s when the refuseniks were around, and I remember my class writing letters to Russia to make them get our Russian people out. And it was a big deal. Like, they would tell us, if everybody writes letters, then they're going to feel bad, and they don't want the bad publicity, so write all. And so I remember writing all these letters to them. And so Maccabi was a very big deal, and writing letters for the refuseniks was a big deal, and just school plays and things, so things like that.
What were your parents involved in? And did you belong to a synagogue? And
so
So
we were very involved in okay, so it's interesting. So my parents were just not very involved in the community necessarily. It's by default you're involved in the community. The community is very tight knit. We're involved with the community. There's no need to be to create a community. It was already built in. There was a witzo, and my mother wasn't involved with that. It came later. Maybe women that became my age when we became adults, that's when we got more involved in those kinds of things. But my mother wasn't so involved, because I think that there was coming from an Arab type of Syrian community, the women weren't so involved in the day-to-day, outside things. Like, they didn't get taught like we do now. It was very patriarchal. And so I guess she really didn't get involved. She was involved with her kids and making sure we were growing up. She didn't. There wasn't really an outlet for them, And my father was a doctor, so he really didn't have time for any extracurricular things that I can remember. So.
Did you have a particular holiday or holidays that you remember celebrating that was your favorite?
My favorite was
up?
Passover. I love Passover. But what I really remember holidays in Panama, it's all around food. Syrian food's awesome. So Passover was really fun because we did it. I have a very big family, a lot of cousins. They would always we would always have first Seder with my father's side of the family, and my parents eventually got divorced, but we would celebrate with them, and I remember the 4 cups of wine. I mean, I was little. I was like maybe 7 or 8 or maybe 9, whatever. And they would make me drink the wine. It wasn't grape juice back then. They would wine, and you had to drink the whole thing. And my cousins would make me drink it. And it was like, because you're supposed to. It's a mitzvah. And I'm like, okay, fine.
As an aside, did your cousins, aunts, uncles have a similar story that your parents and your family did as far as their migration?
Yeah. So my grandfather, my mother's father, was the oldest of her family. So he brought everybody. So he basically made the money and brought everybody from Syria to Panama. And yeah, they all had very similar. They had the family business and they worked together. And then my father's side was a little bit less affluent. But they were more of the people. It's like they grew up in not Panama City. They grew up more in the border states, I guess, province near Costa Rica, and so, and they married. One of them married a Guatemalan, but she lived in Panama. My aunt, and they had similar stories in that migration was from Syria to Israel to Panama. Because they were, pretty much the same migration, yeah.
So what did you do after you graduated high school?
Oh, I guess we skipped a little bit,
okay,
sorry.
Go ahead.
No, it's fine. So I moved to Dallas when I was 11.
Oh,
so, yeah,
okay.
so there was I spent most of my childhood in Panama until I came here when I was 11. And then there was a big shock because my mother didn't know that a kibbutz existed. Yeah, so she went to the JCC, which had just first started in 1978, and she asked the receptionist, "Is there a Jewish day school?" And she said no, and there was a kibbutz. We would have gone there, but we didn't know, so that was sad, because we had to go to public school. And the public school, I didn't know any Jewish kids, and I didn't know who was Jewish and who wasn't Jewish. I came from a little bubble of all Jews and maybe 4 non-Jews in my class. And here's
culture shock.
Yeah, culture shock is an understatement. And I didn't speak English, and I didn't speak English well. I mean, I spoke English eventually, but I had an accent, and people thought I was from Mexico, and all the Texan kids were like, "Ew, you Mexican," and I'm like, "Mexican? I'm not Mexican." Oh, okay. I was like, they just assumed that I was Mexican because I spoke Spanish, but. So I experienced a lot of negative things from the fact that I was from Latin America, and they thought I was Mexican, and when I would meet a Jewish kid, I finally met a Jewish kid in Plano, I remember, and I go, "You're Jewish? Me too." And she said to me, "So?" And I'm like, "Really?" I was like, "Oh no!" So the feeling of the feeling of the Jewish life here was really non-existent, and it was really sad for me. It was eventually when I got to high school, I met a few kids who joined BBYO, and that was a godsend because I eventually knew the Jewish kids and who they were, but the fact is that I joined BBYO, and then I was able to be in the Jewish community a little bit more, and that was really good because then I was with my peers, with my people, and I felt better. Even though I was in public school, and I really was, most of my friends that in Jewish, and were Jewish. I mean, I just felt more comfortable being with Jews, and we had the same.
What brought your family here to Dallas?
Okay, good question. So my mom got divorced from my father, or they were divorced when I was 7. And my mom tried to make a life there. She was the only person in the community that had ever gotten divorced. It was like we were the first. It wasn't normal. So she tried to live there as a single woman, single mom. But she was American. Remember, she was born in Brooklyn. My uncle was studying at the University of Texas. He was studying engineering. He went from Panama to UT, hook 'em horns. And then she said, why don't I just try to make a life in the United States since I'm American and my brother's there, so let's go. And when I was 11, so she went from when I was 7, she divorced, and I was 11 when we left. And my sister was 10. So it was me and my mom and my sister, came to Dallas. And he had already graduated UT, was working in Dallas.
Ah, okay.
So
she had somebody here that she could rely on.
So most Jews from Panama go to Miami if they want to live or if they want to vacation. Nobody comes to Dallas. So we were pretty much isolated here, but it's okay. We made a life. But then after a year, my uncle decided to go back to Panama because really nobody leaves Panama. Everybody stays. So it's a great place to live, really, as a Jew. So he went back to Panama. We were by ourselves here. So
what did your mom do? Did she make a living here?
Yeah, so she's a therapist. She's a psychotherapist. Okay. She actually got her degree in Panama, but it wasn't the same degree. She got a master's in Panama, but it didn't get recognized here, so she couldn't go back to school because she had 2 little kids, so she had to make a living. So she worked 3 jobs. So she worked really hard to make it work for us. So, but I'm very grateful to her for all she did because she worked really hard to make us comfortable, and it's like you said, it was a culture shock.
Right.
So, yeah.
For many people, coming to Dallas, Texas is a culture shock.
Right.
Not just you.
Right.
It's true. Okay, so now my question again was, so you're basically here for middle school, junior high, high school. Right. And then what did you decide to do after that?
So I actually decided to follow in my uncle's footsteps and went to UT. And I always knew I wanted to be an architect. So that's why I went to study architecture. And lucky for me, UT was an excellent architecture school, so that was a good fit. So maybe that's why he came to guide me to that, to that. And so I went to UT, moved to Austin, was very involved with Chabad and Hillel there. Lived in the dorms. Then eventually lived in an apartment. I didn't really keep kosher. We didn't keep Shabbat. I mean, we did in Panama, by the way. We didn't here. It was a lot different. So, but I always knew that that's the right thing to do. So that was my goal, was to eventually, when I got married, that was what I was thinking. When I get married, I'll go back to the way I'm supposed to be. But yeah, so I went to UT, got my degree, and then graduated, bachelor's of architecture, and moved. Actually went to Israel to work for Moshe Safdie, who's an architect and a very famous architect. I was very grateful that I got a job there. And I was going to maybe make Aliyah. But, I grew up knowing that that's our homeland, right, being very Zionist. And I just remembered how it felt moving from a very nice community in Panama to Dallas and feeling alone. And without any family, without any friends, and I was remembering that, and making Aliyah felt like it was going to be that, because I didn't know anybody there, so I didn't feel comfortable doing it, so I came back to Dallas.
How long were you there?
I was there for a summer working, and after 3 months, you make a decision. They didn't back then anyway, in the 90s, they didn't have a work visa. You had to either make Aliyah or go home. So basically I was like, I had to make a decision whether I was going to make Aliyah or not, and I decided not to at that time. That not to say that I don't want to, maybe in the future with my family, but I decided to come back and be with my mom and my sister and make a life in Dallas. I had already had, the Jewish community in Dallas when I was in BBYO, and I knew so many people, and so that's kind of what I decided to do.
So what work did you decide on when you got back here? Who did you work for? So
I worked for, there wasn't, I graduated in 85. It was right around the recession time. There was no jobs for me. And, oh, I'm sorry, I graduated in 91. Graduated in 85 from high school. 91 from, so it was like, in 85 is when the recession started. And then in 91, there was no jobs. There were no jobs at all. So I tried to get them to work for free. I'll work for free. I just need experience. I had one experience, 3 months with Moshe Safdie, that in my resume, but nothing really. So I got a job at the JCC preschool as a sub. Oh. That was so much fun. I loved working with the kids. And my friend said, hey, they have an opening at the JCC preschool. I needed money. I just bought a new car. I had to get some money to pay for it. And so that allowed me to like make a little money and write my thank you cards after my I had interviews, so I'd write thank you cards when the kids were napping, and it was so much fun. It took me 8 months to find a job. So, but I was working at the JCC for that time, and then I didn't want to leave. I like the kids, but then I got a job at a firm. I picked commercial architecture, so that's kind of what I've been doing, commercial interiors, things like that. So, and I was working for different firms, trying to get, it's hard as a woman to be an architect, and so they weren't giving me a lot of opportunities, even though I stayed in one job for 5 years, and they liked me there, they loved me there. And when I decided to leave, they were very upset, but it was like I couldn't grow anymore. They were treating me like a little intern, so I had to move to the next step, and then so I few more firms until I got the hang of it, and then I started my own firm.
Ah.
Yeah.
So how long have you had your own business?
So I decided to have my own business when I had my daughter. So my daughter just turned 16, so my firm turned 16. So I've been doing this for 16 years. So I've been Abadi architecture. Like it took I kept my maiden name for my firm because everybody knew me as Marcie Abadi, Marcela Abadi. They always, so my husband, I was going to change it to, I was going to call it DMR, Dale and Marcie Rhoads Architects. But she goes, DMR, nobody knows what DMR is. You got to stay Abadi. Besides, you'll be the first one on the list.
With an A, yeah.
With an A and a B and an A.
They call your name first.
Right.
So, how did you meet your husband? That chapter.
Actually. He's also an architect.
Ah.
So, right. So I don't know if anybody remembers the superconducting super collider project. We were working together. He was my trainer. And then we were working on that project. Actually, Moshe Safdie was actually going to do some of the buildings. And then they scrapped it, but that's okay. Anyway, but that's where we met. We met at work. And it was love at first sight.
So where and when were you married?
So we were married at Shereth, Israel, in 2001, March 25th. Rosh Chodesh Nisan.
Oh.
And we went we were on our honeymoon during Passover. So
that's hard to keep.
My favorite holiday. Yeah, it was very hard to keep. So it was very interesting. We found Chabad in Spain.
Oh.
And we had Seder in Spain. So that was fun.
Interesting.
Yeah, right? Like the kind of like the exodus from Egypt, the exodus from Spain, whatever. But yeah, so that's how we ended.
And obviously you both decided that you're going to stay here and settle in Dallas.
Yeah.
And raise a family here.
So he lived in Mansfield, Texas, which is close to Arlington and Fort Worth. And he has a son that was older when we got married. He was 17 when he got married, so we weren't going to uproot him. There was no Jewish community in Mansfield, so we really didn't need to come to Dallas. And my family's here, my mom and my sister. And so we waited till he graduated from high school to then move. So we stayed a year in Mansfield, then we moved to Dallas.
Okay.
Back to Dallas, yeah.
Very good.
Plano and then Dallas, yeah.
So did you ever go back to, you said, keeping kosher and Shabbat and
that was the deal.
Yeah.
We had to keep kosher and Shabbat, and that's what we do, and that's why we had to move to Dallas, because really the only way to keep Shabbat was to stay at my mom's every Shabbat. So we would kind of have like a sleepover every Shabbat with her if we wanted to keep Shabbat the right way. Right. Otherwise, because we didn't feel comfortable driving. So so we keep kosher, we keep Shabbat, we keep all the holidays. It's challenging. It's nice because I have my own business. I get to set my when I have vacation time, right? So but sometimes my clients don't understand all these Yom Tovs that we have, so many in a row, especially like the marathon of the high holidays. But it's okay. It's like it works.
So you've been here a long time,
Yeah.
practically a Dallasite.
Yeah.
But tell me, if you can recall, what was Dallas like when you were younger, when you first moved here, and how has it changed? What do you see nowadays?
So different. It is so different. So much more Jewish than it was when I was here. Right when we moved, that's when the JCC had, I think, expanded. I think the JCC was there.
It was.
But listen, so it was one Jewish day school from K through 8th, right? There was Akiba. Now there's 4. There's Akiba, there's Torday School, there's Levine, and then there's the 2 high schools, 3 high schools. Mm-hmm. There's Masora, there's TTI, and there's Yavna. That wasn't around when I was there. There was no choices like that. And so there's so many more Orthodox synagogues. There was a lot of conservative synagogues, maybe 1 or 2. I know Chabad was here when in the 70s, but there is a lot more Jewish life here. There were no kosher restaurants before. I mean, there was the kosher. I remember there was there was one little mini kosher supermarket.
Reichman's.
Right. There was Reichman's, right, and then it became
Debbie bought it.
Debbie bought it, and then and so that was, and then the big supermarket took over, right? So a lot of things have changed. There was a mom and pop stuff, but then now there's so many kosher options and kosher restaurants, and it's very different. Yeah.
What else are you involved in, if anything, besides the Jewish community here?
So I'm very involved with my professional community. So I'm very involved with the American Institute of Architects. My focus today is handicap accessibility. So I'm very involved with teaching about handicap accessibility to other architects, to owners, to building owners. I write a blog about it, I newsletter every month, but so I'm very involved with that. I was very involved before I became Shomer Shabbat, before I became observant. I was very involved with like Habitat for Humanity and Hearts and Hammers, but they always have programs on Saturday, so I can't do that anymore. But so we try to do other things. We do activities with to show it, awareness to for the handicap and how to make life easier for them. Mm-hmm. And I'm very involved with. I used to be more involved with the Girl Scouts. Being part of their trainings and doing things. But my daughter, there was no Jewish Girl Scouts. There's a Jewish Boy Scouts, but my son never really did it. But so those are the kinds of things that I kind of became involved with besides the Jewish community. I'm very involved with the Jewish community in general. I love being part of that, and a bunch of boards that I used to belong to, and was very involved with the PTA and with lots of boards in my synagogue. And and besides that, I'm love to be involved with my professional community.
How has your mom and your sister adjusted to being here? How do you see their lives?
Maybe I'll let them speak for themselves. But I can tell you that my mother and I. My mother is funny. So she's very Latin in that way. It's like I think what I had to do is I had to basically assimilate to feel good, right? So I'm very American, and so I don't really, and I go back to Panama all the time to visit my father. My father's still there, may live a long life. And I have my cousins getting married, and so I'm still very connected to my family in Panama, but my sister and is much more connected. Mm-hmm. So she and I'll maybe you'll interview her,
right.
She'll tell you all about her ideas about her life here. But I think I'm the one that integrated most out of all 3 of us. Mm-hmm. I'm the one that really made a life here, became much more involved with the Jewish life here, and became just involved in general. I just wanted that same feeling of a community, which isn't the same, but because like I told you before, the Panamanian community is just already there. It's automatic. Right. Here, I had to work for it. You had to work to build it, and I'm happy to do that. But that was one of the things that I know I did differently than my sister and my mom. Mm-hmm. Just become more involved in the community.
That's very interesting. Through the years, is there anybody that you can point to that you can say was really a good role model for you?
So it's it's interesting. My mother is the first person that came to my mind. So she is a very strong, liberated woman, right? She decided that the marriage she was in wasn't going to be a good marriage for her, and instead of being like all the women that stay in the marriage even if it's not a good one, she had the courage to leave the marriage. Not only leave the marriage and go against the community, because that doesn't happen. She left the country and she started brand new in a brand new country. I mean, she came to Panama when she was 8. So she hadn't lived in the United States since she was 8. And then, was pretty much, in Panamanian for all practical purposes. And moved here and had to start all over. And so she taught me to be a strong person and not to give up and to persevere and to, that's who started it. I think I later found other people that had the same ideas and I looked to them as mentors, but my mother was really the first person to show me that women could be whatever they wanted to be.
Right.
Yeah.
I've just thought of this, if you could change something about circumstances and the way things went for you, would there be anything that you would change?
Yeah. So I think I would have loved to have gone to Akiba. Let's go back for it. I don't want to go back to school. But that would have been a really awesome thing to have happened if we would have come here and thank God for the Federation. Thank God for the Federation now, because I think they're much more, they're much, there's a lot more knowledge. Obviously, we have things that we can go to, then where can we go? And then there's things that people know that are here, but we didn't know. So if I would have had to change anything, I would have loved to have been able to be part of that community a little bit more. But you know what? I don't have any regrets, because everything that happened to me, it brought me here. Maybe it made me work harder to make a community, because I didn't have it all ready for me. Here you go. Here's your Jewish community. I had to build it, and so maybe that's what had to happen. Only Hashem knows why things happen the way they do. And so I just really think that no regrets, really, that my life, all the stumbling blocks and all the things that I had to go through got me here. So,
yeah. If you could pinpoint something, what would you say you were the most proud of? It could be professionally, it could be personally, anything you like.
I really am very proud of my business. And the fact is that I was acknowledged, or people in my community, in my professional community, decided that I have elevated the profession. For what the things that I do has elevated the profession, and they made me fellow. So I'm now. 2 years ago I got. I became a fellow. Thank you. I became a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. So It's funny because when you're a member of the AIA, it's AIA, American Institute of Architects. When you become a fellow, you add an F. So we joke that it's like we work so hard for that F. So that's the one F we like, So, but yeah, so I'm pretty proud of that. That they thought enough of me to nominate me, and that when I turned in my packet, they thought well enough to elevate me to fellow.
Great.
So
that's a wonderful achievement.
Thank you.
Oh. So if you had to add anything else to this interview, what else would you like to tell everyone?
So let's see. I just think that I'm very proud of the community that I come from. It's cool that I still consider myself. I'm Syrian, but I'm also Panamanian. So it's like two things that I'm really proud of where I come from. They're two great communities, and it's nice when I run into people that are also Syrian or that know the Syrians and that they think of us in a good way. There's a couple of rabbis in a Torah Day school that have been around Syrians and taught at Syrian schools in Brooklyn, and then they think it's kind of cool that they like our community, and then it's just nice. I think that coming from that background has given me a lot of depth. Sharing that with my kids and sharing that with my friends, and being able to, teach them about where we come from, and that they should be proud of that. Because it's a very, that Aleppo community is a very, it was a very Jewish community, very full of, and it's interesting how we live our lives. It was effortless to be Jewish. It's almost like it's inside us. It's like we don't have to work so hard. Like all the things that we do now, I grew up with, and it just feels very natural. Even though I've lived most of my adult life in a secular, assimilated, way of being, but my Yiddishkeit, my feeling for Israel, my feelings for the Judaism, it's just natural, second nature to me. It's like, so I'm proud of where I come from.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Marcie. It's been a delight to interview you.
Thank you.
And we will talk again soon.
Okay, great. Thanks.